Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar program with our guest, Ken Timmerman. Ken is a senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute and an investigative journalist. I am Shoshana Bryant, senior director of the JPC and your host. Just a quick intro today because it's summer and it's hot. The JPC was founded in 1985 to provide perspectives and analysis of foreign and domestic policy by scholars, academics, and commentators. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our Insight articles and our magazine, In Focus Quarterly. The summer issue of In Focus is up right now. It is our domestic policy issue, and it follows two issues devoted to Israel and to American Jews following the horrific events of October 7th. You can also, on our website, binge watch the last 4.5 years of JPC webinar programming. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. Right now, our most important job is to support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. And now more than ever, we support the government of Israel and the IDF in their defense of the people of Israel, and in bringing the perpetrators of the massacres, rapes, hostage-taking, and rocket barrages to justice, and making Hamas release the hostages. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. Today, we're turning to Iran, the puppet master of both Israel's enemies and America's enemies. Iran is the incubator and financier of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in the Red Sea, as well as both Sunni and Shiite radicals across the Middle East and Africa. Iran enhances its military relations with Russia, selling drones for use in Ukraine, and, by the way, battle testing those same drones for potential use against Israeli and Western targets. And as it enhances its economic relations with China, selling it oil under waivers by the Biden administration, and continues to enrich uranium in violation of all of its agreements, the American administration appears unwilling to call out the mullahs. So today, our guest, Ken Timmerman, is likely to do it for them. In the early 1980s, Ken was a Middle East correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and he developed an expertise in arms trade. In 1982, he was taken prisoner for 24 days by Fatah guerrillas in Lebanon, something he will tell you changed his life in many ways. He was the first American journalist on the scene when Islamic militants bombed the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1983. He covered the Iran-Iraq War and the burgeoning arms industry in the Middle East across the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, writing for a variety of specialized publications about Iranian arms procurement and efforts by Syria, Libya, and Iraq to acquire weapons of mass destruction. In 1991, he published the enormously important book, Death Lobby: How the West Armed Iraq, interviewing arms merchants and government operatives to reveal how Western governments transformed Iraq into a regional superpower by ignoring the warnings of Iraq's true intentions and by selling weapons to Saddam Hussein. But Iran has been the largest focus of Ken's investigative and journalistic skills, not only reporting on advances in Iran's nuclear technologies and weapons capability, but also on the people of Iran and their desire to be rid of the Islamic regime. He is a founder of the Foundation for Democracy in Iran, and he works with Iranian opposition expatriates to try to topple the Iranian government. So far, it hasn't worked, but we keep His newest book, is called Raising Olives in Provence. And I just gave you a huge introduction of Ken as a weapons guy and a political operator and a security person. Raising Olives in Provence is a great beach read. It's about his other life, and I strongly recommend it. Raising Olives in Provence and Ken Timmerman. Ken, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Shoshana, and I'm speaking to you from the south of France, where we are in our summer quarters. And Iran, of course, is right up there in everyone's concerns today. I have a piece coming out with the America First Policy Institute shortly called Maximum Pressure, Maximum Support. And I want to explain a little bit what that means. I owe, by the way, that title to Eli Kohanen, who's a colleague of mine at AFPI, which is the term that she used for the new Iran policy she thinks the next administration should adopt. That was part of her chapter in the Middle East, her Middle East chapter in the AFPI National Security Strategy book that just came out recently. So look, the Islamic regime, you look around, the Islamic regime in Iran, it's on a roll. Since Biden came into office, the United States stopped enforcing the Trump-era sanctions on Iranian oil exports. They paid $6 billion in exchange for the release of 5 dual citizen hostages and sought to revive the failed 2015 nuclear deal. They allowed the United Nations sanctions on Iran's missile programs to expire in October 2023 and waived sanctions, this is the Biden administration, in November 23, allowing Iran to access $10 billion in frozen assets in Iraq. Far from moderating the regime's behavior, these US concessions have only emboldened the regime. Since 2021, they've expanded their support, as you mentioned, Shoshana, for the terrorist groups in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories. At home, the regime cracked down on nationwide protests that erupted in September 22 after the murder of a young Iranian Kurdish woman for failing to comply with Islamic hijab rules. By the time the Biden administration gave up its efforts to revive the nuclear deal in late 2023, the regime was flush with cash, impervious to outside pressures, and emboldened to attack US assets and US allies in the region with impunity, as they thought they were going to do with Israel in April. Further enhancing the Iranian regime's position was the expansion of its alliances with Russia and China. Not only did Tehran sign massive long-term oil and investment deals with both powers, which, by the way, have gone almost completely unnoticed, both in the policy community and in the national media, but they solidified military and strategic ties to the point where I believe we can now speak of a Russia, China, Iran axis of opportunism, an axis of opportunism. In just 3 short years, the Iranian regime has gone from being virtually broke and fearful of the US maximum pressure campaign of President Trump to becoming the region's power broker. And now the International Atomic Energy Agency is warning that Iran has accelerated the production of highly enriched uranium to the point where it could produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a nuclear warhead, quote, in as little as 7 days. 7 days for the first warhead. And they would have enough weapons-grade uranium for 13 weapons in 5 months. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. It is absolutely mind-boggling. So how did we get here? I argue that the policies of all previous US administrations have failed because all of them, including the Trump administration, were predicated on the notion that through either carrots or sticks, enough carrots, enough sticks would convince the regime to change its behavior. But they never have. When they've been given incentives, the mullahs just burp and don't even say thank you. They gobble them up and don't even say thank you and continue doing what they were doing. And when they do get moderately whacked through sanctions, essentially what they do is redirect the economy to the Revolutionary Guards and make more money on the black market through corrupt deals, corrupt business deals. So sanctions alone do not have the impact of changing Iran's behavior. And by the way, I argue in this paper for AFPI that should not be our goal. We should give up this goal of trying to change the behavior of the Iranian regime because we have really exhausted pretty much the panoply of policies that you can use, either carrots or sticks. The Iranian regime doesn't care because their basic values are so completely different from ours that to change the behavior we object to would essentially be to change the regime itself. Now, I get into that in a lot more detail in the paper. I'm not going to go through those arguments, but if you are interested, it will be out at the AFP website I hope in another week or 2 weeks. Now there is one caveat here. There is one thing that from time to time has worked, and that is military pressure. In 1988, the Reagan administration, in response to Iran's efforts to mine the Strait of Hormuz, primarily to restrict the flow of Iraqi oil exports to the Strait of Hormuz, the Reagan administration launched Operation Praying Mantis. In 24 hours, the U.S. Navy sank a third of Iran's major surface ships, destroyed 2 offshore oil platforms and a bunch of helicopters. Not bad. And it got the Iranians to stop mining the Strait of Hormuz. And again, more recently, there's the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Very, very important. Now, I have yet another new book coming out, Shoshana, in hopefully, right now we're targeting September 11th for the release date, and there's an important reason why that date, why we chose that date. The book's called The Iran House. And among other things, it's my reporting on Iran over the years, wars around the region, but also I talk about my involvement as an agent runner for the FBI at the time of Qasem Soleimani's assassination. Now, over the years, because I've been debriefing Iranian defectors for a team of lawyers representing the victims of 9/11 families, I've gotten to know a lot of people who come away from Iranian intelligence, and all of them, without exception, maintain ties back in Iran. And a lot of that information I've not been able to use journalistically, but when one of these guys comes to me and say, hey, look, there's a threat to the United States, or the Iranians are threatening a British airliner, you cannot sit back, even if you're a journalist, you cannot sit back and not report that information to the government. So many times I have brought information like that to the government and wound up through the FBI's own procedures, developed a relationship with them where I would be running subagents, bringing threat information to the United States. One of the chapters in the book is about Qasem Soleimani. It's about the killing Qasem Soleimani. What most Americans don't realize, because it was never talked about much at the time, is that Qasem Soleimani went to Baghdad to conduct a massive anti-American operation. He was there to essentially storm the U.S. embassy around the 10th of January, 2020, and take all of our diplomats hostage. It was a plan the Iranians had developed, and I go into this in great detail in the book. The information is absolutely stunning and will have an impact, I believe, on the U.S. presidential election, because there was involvement of Americans in this plot who wanted to harm Donald Trump's re-election campaign in 2020. They thought that if the Iranians could repeat what they did in Tehran in 1979, Donald Trump would be toast in 2020. So Qasem Soleimani was going to Baghdad to carry out this operation, and I was involved over the New Year's holiday with some of my guys who were feeding me information live that they were getting from their sources in Tehran, and talking about this operation, saying it's going to come down. They've got 25,000 people marching on Baghdad from Karbala to the south, and on, all of these details. And finally, my FBI handler said, well, Ken, what do you think we should do? What do you think we should do? Not your guys. What do you think we should do? And I said, look, there's only one thing the Iranian regime respects, and that is force. And we have to hit them as hard as we possibly can. Don't sucker punch them. Don't pretend to hit them as hard as we possibly can. And the next day, a drone killed Qasem Soleimani. So, as I say in the book, if I played even a tiny little role in that decision to kill Qasem Soleimani, and by the way, we learned from Bob Woodward's book, one of his books about Trump, is that Lindsey Graham was talking to Trump about this over the same time I was, and was telling him not to do it. He said, oh, this is going to start a major war. So if I had any responsibility for that or played into that decision. I'm very proud of that. In the piece for AFPI, I talk about maximum pressure. I think we know what maximum pressure means. It means going back to the Trump era sanctions on oils, economic sanctions, and isolation. But I also talk about maximum support for the pro-freedom forces in Iran. And you asked in the introduction, Shoshana, what that means, what's the state of the opposition. Look, the Iranian opposition is on the inside. It's on the inside that we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention, for example, to what has happened since in all of those protests, since the killing of Mahsa Amini, this Kurdish woman in October of 2022. The protests were all over the country, and there were 10, 20 of them a day in different places. This has never happened before. So there's a huge foment just under the surface in Iran. So what I talk about is the kind of support we can provide. For example, we can revamp our international broadcasting activities to support the Iranian opposition, both inside Iran and in exile. We don't do that today. Believe it or not, we don't do that. Voice of America is the voice of Tehran, essentially. It is pathetic. We can support independent broadcasting networks, such as Iran International TV in London, that have a solid track record, of responsible and innovative reporting. They're the ones, for example, who revealed that Rob Malley, the president's emissary to the Iranian regime, was quite probably an Iranian agent, and his security clearance was then suspended. We can fund the distribution of Starlink terminals inside Iran, or some equivalent satellite WiMAX or other internet service that cannot be jammed by the regime. What they do when protests erupt, they shut off the internet and the nation goes dark. So if we can help the pro-freedom movement communicate with the outside world, that would make a huge difference, I think, in moments of future protest. The U.S. government spokesman should regularly address the repression of women, gays, children, minorities, ethnic minorities inside Iran. To the U.S. media, they should talk about this to increase public awareness. You never hear about it from the State Department spokesman, except for mealy-mouthed platitudes. We should facilitate the movement of Iranian opposition activists and provide, where possible, financial assistance to them. Help them to get out of Iran through other countries, to meet with other people, to meet with American diplomats as well. We should participate in and organize, sponsor public conferences that bring Iranian opposition activists together and revive the State Department and National Endowment for Democracy funding for civil society inside Iran. The single most important thing, this is the real signature policy, for me at least, the next administration should appoint a U.S. ambassador to the people of Iran, not to the regime, to the people of Iran, to assist in coordinating opposition activities and promoting them on the world stage. And this ambassador and other U.S. government officials should regularly meet with members of the Iranian American community, with the Iranian diaspora, both in public and in private, as well as meeting with these activists who have come out from inside Iran. Note, please make a very careful note of this. None of what I've just told you, none of what I am proposing to the next administration involves U.S. military force. None of it. None of it involves bullets, bombs, or covert action. I'm not against covert operations, but the CIA's got a terrible track record in Iran. So I think we have to be very, very careful of this. If I can go on for just a couple more minutes, I'd like to mention, so this empowering the opposition has to go hand in hand with delegitimizing the regime in Tehran. Right now, we are legitimizing them. The Biden administration is legitimizing the mullahs. We have to delegitimize the regime. This is done at the United Nations, within international organizations, and in the media, something that we don't do. We should work with the International Atomic Energy Agency to resume vigorous inspections of the regime's illegal nuclear sites. Why don't we hear anything about this from the Biden people? There were something like 6 UN Security Council resolutions condemning Iran during Bush 43, between 2005 and 2007. We don't hear a word about that from Biden. We should go back to working with the IAEA, referring Iran for sanctions to the UN Security Council, which allows us to get multilateral sanctions. We should also go back to crippling sanctions on the regime's oil exports, ban its access to the US dollar and euro financial markets. All these sanctions on individual bad actors just aren't enough. Finally, the IRGC, they always get called out by Tehran to repress pro-freedom demonstrations. They become the most hated institution in Iran. As matters escalate between the Islamic regime and the US and its allies in the region, we should make clear that Iranian attacks against Americans will result in US military strikes against Iran, in particular, the IRGC. So while in the maximum support piece of this, I am not arguing for military force, I do believe that we have a credible threat of military force on the table publicly. Let the regime know it. This is the red line. If you cross this red line, you will get whacked. And when they cross the red line, and when they do cross the red line, because they will get whacked. This is what we have to do to reestablish deterrence. It doesn't change their behavior, but it might just get them to go a little bit more cautiously. Finally, this axis between Russia, China, Iran. We have to target sanctions on that. We have to focus sanctions on that. Remember, in 1982, the Reagan administration tried to shut down the Russian pipeline into Europe, oil pipeline, sanctioning the suppliers. We should think of things like this. The Russians are building pipelines to get Iranian gas out, Iranian oil. These are things that we can target intelligently through the U.S. Treasury, through sanctions. So I've given you a lot there, a big piece, but maximum pressure on the regime, pressure both directly, pressure diplomatically, pressure economically, pressure through international organizations, and maximum support for the pro-freedom movement inside Iran, including naming a U.S. ambassador to the free people of Iran.
If only, right? If only.
Well, the next administration, Biden certainly won't do it.
Well, okay, speaking of, let me ask you the off the track question first. Following the attempted assassination against President Trump, we know that the Iranians have targeted American government officials in the past and perhaps are still targeting them. They have very quickly and very loudly announced that they had nothing to do with the attack on President Trump. What do you know about this? Well,
I don't know whether they were involved with the shooter. I have no information about that whatsoever. What I can tell you, though, absolutely, unequivocally, and this was from my own Iranian sources, reported to the FBI, reported to the US government, that after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa. Now, a fatwa in the Islamic world is a judicial order authorizing the murder of Donald J. Trump. When you listen to the interim foreign minister of Iran saying, well, we've been very clear that, yes, of course, we want the United States to be punished for killing Qasem Soleimani through legal and judicial means. Well, legal and judicial means are Islamic fatwa, which means murder, which authorizes the murder, the assassination of Donald J. Trump. I don't know if they're specifically involved, but I can tell you they were very, very active when my guys were looking into this, 21, 22. After that, the Biden administration had zero interest in pursuing it. They let all of these leads that I developed for them drop. Zero interest in pursuing it. So since the end of 21 or mid 22, the Biden people have instructed the FBI not to develop derogatory information about the Iranian regime. I can tell you even that people I know, Iranians I know in Los Angeles who used to regularly meet with the FBI, to give them, in a friendly manner, to give them information. The FBI sought them out. They don't meet with them any longer. The FBI doesn't want to talk to them.
Okay. Sliding over just a little bit. You mentioned the IAEA has raised some new concerns about what Iran is doing. So we have several questions from listeners that I'm going to put into one essential question. How bad is it if you get the IAEA suddenly to pop up and be concerned? It must be pretty bad, right? Number two, well, because sometimes they don't. Number two, where are the Europeans on this? And number three, where is the United States on this? How seriously is the West taking the IAEA concerns? And what can we do about it if we do take it?
We're not taking it seriously. Neither the Europeans nor the Biden administration. And by the way, Grossi, the Secretary General of the IAEA, he's terrific. Rafael Grossi, he's absolutely terrific. He's arguably the best Director General they have ever had, because he's talking about this publicly. He is going to the UN. He's going to the Security Council, and then everybody said, "Oh, ho hum. Oh, really? The Iranians again? Nuclear? No, we know that. Those inspections, those pesky inspections, they aren't going so well. Too bad. Who cares?" But he is very, very good, and I can easily imagine the next administration appointing somebody as ambassador to the IAEA, such as we had during the Bush administration in the mid-2000s, who would actively engage with this Secretary General. This would be very different from what they did with, we had to light a fire in 2005, 2006 under El Baradei, who was then the Director General of the IAEA. With Grossi, we wouldn't have to. We'd just have to enable him. We'd just clear a path, and let him, give him the ball and let him run, because he's ready to do it. He's very, very energetic. He's committed. He understands the threat, but he has zero support at this point.
So we finally get a Director General who's good after years and years of having one who isn't, and we drop the ball.
That's correct.
So someone asks, how can we be sure that Iran doesn't already have a bomb or bomb capability? How do we know? Do we really know?
As Donald Rumsfeld.
Let me just add to that. There's another question that goes along with that. Yeah. That although the Trump administration took out Qasem Soleimani, we did not retaliate when Iran's proxies took out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production. Is that because we are at some level deterred by Iran and by the threat that they may have weapons that we don't know about? So those are two kind of interrelated questions.
Okay, Donald Rumsfeld used to say, you don't know what you don't know. There's the known unknowns and the known unknowns, and the known unknown about Iran is that we do not know whether they have a weapon or not. We do not know, but we know that we don't know it. We know that they've not used it. We believe that they've not transported it, sent it outside of Iran. We're pretty sure about that, but we don't know what we don't know. What we do know, very important, what we do know. We do know that they have developed and tested all of the non-nuclear components of a weapon, of a nuclear weapon. And the non-nuclear components are rather significant. It's the nuclear initiator, it's all the timing elements, some of this is extremely sophisticated. They've tested all of it. And we know it because the IAEA has reported it, and because the Israelis, when they were able to seize the nuclear archive in what has got to be the most spectacular international espionage effort of all time, going into Tehran, into that warehouse, breaking through 4 gigantic safes within a 6-hour window, gathering 500 boxes in panel trucks and getting out of Dodge before anybody woke up. Just absolutely amazing. And in that information were reports of the testing of some of the non-nuclear components and other things. And they've done more since then. So we know that they have everything that they need for a bomb. We know that they have weapon design. We know that they have rockets that are capable of carrying a weapon should they decide to put it on a rocket, which I'm not entirely convinced they would, because of missile defense capabilities in Israel and elsewhere. And we know that they have the weapons grade uranium. We know they have enough, right? The quantities, they have enough right now. If they, with that, just that last little bit of enrichment, 1 week, they would have enough for a first weapon. And 13 weapons in 5 months. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the quantity of material they've got. But have they actually assembled it?
Well, that tells us something that doesn't really end up telling us what we want to know. However, it does relate to another question. Hezbollah, north of Israel, has been conducting, I don't want to call it low-level war because it isn't. There are between 80 and 100,000 Israelis who are evacuated from their homes. It is not low-level war.
Right.
However, it is not the war that Hezbollah could prosecute if it chose to, given what its arsenal is. So the question is Hezbollah making those choices itself, or is it Iran making the choice of how much Hezbollah fires off? Because it isn't Hezbollah in some way the retaliatory capability of Iran against Israel? Should Iran attack, should Israel attack Iran, they will take out certain things. They will do a certain amount of damage. We know they can, and we know they will. Isn't Hezbollah the retaliatory capability that keeps Israel a little bit deterred as well? So who's calling the shots?
Yeah, I think you're right about that they are the retaliatory capability. I went to Israel after the October 7th attacks at the end of November, and everybody was waiting for that other shoe to drop, the war in the north. And so far, it hasn't happened, but we are this close to that war. I've been up along that frontier. I've walked parts of it, and I've driven the rest of it. I've driven all the way from Metula right along the border to the other side, Rosh Nikra, and sometimes crossing the border in a rental car in 2006 during the 2006 war. I recount, that's also in the new book, The Iran House. I learned how to drive like a French tank driver, reverse. Once I got out in the middle of the field, the Israelis on one side, the Hezbollah on the other side. But that is I think Hezbollah also is deterred by the political situation inside Lebanon. People tend to minimize this. 2006, while Hezbollah claimed it was a great victory, and true enough, it was a defeat for Israel in many ways. The 2006 war was a defeat for Israel in many ways. Nevertheless, the IDF did tremendous damage to Lebanese infrastructure, and they've made very clear that should there be a new war in the north, they will do much more. They will basically turn out the lights in Lebanon. And I don't think the Lebanese people are really looking forward to that. And somehow I think Hezbollah, although they represent, they're a very significant political and social force inside Lebanon, they are under constraints of I don't want to say public opinion. It may, from their political opponents inside Lebanon and from people both in their own areas and outside. So I think that is a restraining factor. I think they are telling the Iranians, look, we're ready to do it if you're ready to do it. Are you ready to go all the way? Then we're ready to go. But if you just kind of want us to go and bloody our noses and make ourselves very unpopular with our fellow Lebanese, forget it. Now, this is my gut talking. That is not information. That is my gut talking, but that's the fruit of 30 years of looking at this, 40 years of looking at this.
And you have a lot of experience in Lebanon with Lebanese people. So
right.
It's me, at least, that when you talk about how the Lebanese see Hezbollah, that makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, the Biden administration is saying to Israel, do not escalate this war. Do not have a war. Do not do these things. Let's talk about it. Let's be nice about it. Is that just another form of appeasement of Iran by the Biden administration? Is that something?
Yes, it is another form of appeasement, but it's also their policy. They didn't want Israel to, quote, escalate against Hamas either, right? They've been constantly trying to force Israel into a ceasefire that would essentially mean the continuation of Hamas as a military and political entity, which Israel cannot allow to have happen. They have to destroy Hamas as an operational entity for the future. So I think that is their policy. They don't want to see a major war before the U.S. elections in November. I mean, it's really as simple as that.
So if we
Well,
have,
excuse me. It's as simple as that, but it's also a lot more complicated because there's a lot more deviousness involved too. There's a devious two-faced policy towards Israel, and there's a tremendous amount of appeasement towards Iran, which is ideological in scope and hard for most Americans to understand. The Democrat Party believes that the Islamic regime in Tehran is their friend.
well, let me ask you something. Does it believe it's their friend, or does it believe it can be bribed into being what we call a responsible stakeholder? Because that's sort of what they do to the Palestinians as well. I don't really believe they think that Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas and those guys are their friends, but they do seem to believe that if you offer them enough, they will play nicely. Is that where we are?
No, it's very different. I think the Democrats actually believe the Tehran regime are their friends and their allies. They think the same way. I almost should get this quote, see if I can dig out this quote from Bill Clinton in 2005, I think it was in Aspen. He was talking, he was giving an interview and said, here's this country, they just had 5 elections, and all the people that I like got elected. You know, they had 2 presidents, they had 2 majlis, and they had municipal elections, and the people that I side with, 70% of the people of Iran voted for my people. It wouldn't happen in my country, he said, but it happened in Iran, where the, quote, liberals won all of these elections. And of course, it's a total misunderstanding of the Iranian elections. It's a total misunderstanding of Iran itself, but it's a profoundly, it is a deeply rooted belief on the part of many, many top Democrat leaders.
Have we misunderstood the current Iranian elections? There's an awful lot of media saying it's a reformer. He's a reformer. We should talk to him because he's a reformer. Since some of us, and you in particular, but even the people that are listening today, know that nobody runs for anything in Iran unless they've been vetted and approved.
Right.
So there are no reformers.
Right.
Ignoring that, just because it fits the narrative, we need a reformer, now we can talk to that person. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, he's a reformer who wears his Revolutionary Guards uniform when he comes to Parliament, right? He was a member of Parliament. He shows up in his IRGC duds. You know, it used to be, Shoshana, when Khatami, who was a mullah, was elected. I say they just elected a smiling turban, but he's still part of the regime. Rouhani, another smiling turban. Raisi, well, he wasn't smiling quite as much, but another turban. Now we can't say a smiling turban. We could just say a reformist. But reformist means, in the Iranian political context, he is part of the regime. He is part of the regime, and his goal is the survival of the regime. This is why all of these policies to change the behavior of the regime fail and will continue to fail, because every politician currently operating officially inside Iran today, in other words, who is not part of the pro-freedom movement, of the opposition, whatever, every single politician is pro-regime, And Pezeshkian himself said during the campaign, and has made it very clear since then, that he will follow Khamenei's policies. Now, Khatami didn't say that. Khatami was, in that way, a little bit more adventurous than Pezeshkian. Pezeshkian has said he will follow Khamenei's policies. So we'll have to see. I mean, I'm not opposed at this point to, talk is cheap, as they say. You know, remember Donald Trump went to North Korea, talked to Little Rocket Man several times, got nothing out of it, but for 18 months, it reduced the tensions on the Korean Peninsula. And if he had stayed in office a second term, who knows? He might have gotten an actual deal. But Little Rocket Man is very different from the Iranian mullahs. He is far less ideological. He's a far more practical guy than the Iranian regime. They are ideological anti-American, anti-Western, Islamist. They have this millenary, this belief in this end time belief that the Mahdi is going to come, and they will be ushering the Mahdi on his way to Jerusalem, and all the world will become Muslim, and that is their goal, and they believe it. They believe that. So temporary truces, with the Iranian regime will be deadly in the end.
So while you're looking for your Bill Clinton quote, a listener sent us one from President Obama that recognized Iranian equities in the Middle East. And I would say pretty fair, I think. So thank you for sending that in. Talk to us, if you will, because we haven't really talked about dissidents. I mean, you talk about them, but the regime opposes, first of all, I mean, I think that the largest number of people executed by the Iranian regime, which is a huge number, by the way, that no one pays any attention to, who they're executing, are Kurds. So talk to us about the Kurds of Iran and the kind of pressures that they face, and whether there's something specific that the U.S., you gave us a great list of things that the U.S. government could do to help Iranians in general. Talk to us about the Kurds.
So I've spent a lot of time, not in Iranian Kurdistan, but in Iraqi Kurdistan with the Iranian guerrilla fighters, Iranian Kurdish guerrilla fighters. And I talk about that in my new book, The Iran House. They're really quite extraordinary from many different parties. And it's a broad-based movement. They have not declared an open war on the regime. Their goal is not to declare war. Their goal is to serve as a little bit like a defense force. So if the regime commits an exaction against Kurds in some Kurdish village, they will go and whack some IRGC officers in a barracks. It's a little bit tit for tat, but they can do a lot the day when things start to happen. Remember, Ceausescu was the eternal president of Romania. Boy, he was solidly ensconced. He was one of our partners during the Cold War. Oh yes, he could get into the ear of the Russians, because the Soviets, because he was not. In 3 weeks, he was toast. So when things actually start to happen, they can happen quickly. And you are so right to mention the Kurds and the Baluch and the Azeris, right? And the Azeris. I used to give a seminar at JCTA, the Joint Counterintelligence Training Academy at Quantico, on the kind of the demography of Iran and the Iranian opposition. And one of the things that people don't realize is that about 50% of Iranians are Persians, ethnic Persians. The other 50% are Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Baluch, Bakhtiaris, and all these other minorities. Some of them are Arabs as well, and they speak Turkish, Kurdish, Arabic, and Baluchi, and many of them don't speak Persian. Many of them do not speak Persian in the provinces, and I have always believed. And when I was running FDI, the Foundation for Democracy in Iran, we had a outreach to all of the minority groups and did programs with them. And whenever I have spoken to Iranian opposition audiences, which I do frequently, I try to encourage them. Remember that Iran is it's kind of like a Joseph in his many-colored blanket. His blanket of many colors, or his coat of many colors. There are lots of different flavors there. And you should enjoy all of the flavors. So the good thing about the movement since Mahsa Amini is that it has included all of the minorities. And that, I think, has been the single biggest step forward that the pro-freedom movement has made.
It's important. It is important. I agree with you. We do not understand enough about who the Iranians are and what constitutes the population of that country. Another country we don't understand a whole lot about, someone has asked if you would please address the issue of Qatar. Qatar, which appears to a lot of Americans to be a modern place, a
Hmm.
friendly place. Israelis have gone to Qatar, but what are they really?
Hmm. A country? Did you say a country?
I said a country. I did say a
You said a
country.
country. Yeah, my old friend when I used to work for ABC News 35 years ago. Charlie Glass called them tribes with flags. So Qatar is a tribe with a flag and a lot of natural gas. And the Qataris, since the coup, where the son deposed the father, 15 years ago now, the Al Thani family has thrown in its lot with the Iranians, and they are anti-Saudi. So they were financing Al Qaeda before 9/11. I mean, I can remember when I was researching this stuff. I did the first story that ever appeared on Osama bin Laden in June of 1998 in the Reader's Digest. And they sent me all over the place to talk to Saudi dissidents and whatever. And when I was in London talking to Saad al-Faqih and other people who were later arrested as being Al-Qaeda members, which they would tell me about the limousine that came from the Qatari embassy with bags of cash once a month to support the movement, the anti-Saudi movement, Al-Qaeda, 1998. Remember, the Saudis broke diplomatic relations with them a number of years ago. Trump helped to bring them back together, but it was over their both the Qataris' ties to Al Qaeda, ongoing ties to Al Qaeda, and their alliance with Iran. I do not believe that Qatar is an ally of the United States. I do not believe that we should continue to maintain a massive airbase in Qatar. I think we should shut it down. We could move it to Iraqi Kurdistan. The Kurds would love to have it. We could move it to other places. We do not need that airbase. Boy, it would have been great if we'd kept Bagram in Afghanistan. But okay, we didn't. But that base in Qatar is as problematic as Incirlik is in Turkey. Neither country, Turkey nor Qatar, I believe, are U.S. allies.
I think a lot of us would agree with that. Side question. Today is the 30th anniversary of the Iranian assisted bombing of the Amiya Jewish community in Buenos Aires. They killed 85 people, they wounded hundreds of people. Until October 7th of 2023, it was the deadliest single anti-Semitic incident in the world since the Holocaust. It has clearly been supplanted. So the Argentinian government keeps asking for the extradition of certain Iranian officials, including Mohsen Rezai, who's had several high-ranking positions in the Islamic Republic. Has anybody, first of all, can you tell us anything about Rezai? I imagine you can. Secondly, has anybody in the United States ever made a helpful request to help the Argentinians bring justice to the families after that bombing?
Well, about Rezai, read my new book. I've got a lot of stuff about Rezai, including an FBI effort that I was involved in to recruit him as a U.S. operative. And the hook was, well, let's say that there was a sealed indictment in the United States, which allows us to go over and meet with you someplace to negotiate either your rendition or cooperation, whatever it might be. And there were several meetings between Rezai and the FBI. Finally, it was a former CIA guy named Flint Leverett who unwittingly, because he's an idiot, put the kibosh on the whole thing by greeting Rezai at a Track 2 diplomacy conference as if he was an old friend, and presented himself as, oh yeah, I'm a former CIA officer, blah, blah, blah. And Rezai's there with his translator. The translator's eyes bug out of his head. And Rezai almost gets arrested when he gets back to Tehran. Rezai thought that Flint Leverett was supposed to be his next contact with the FBI. And it turned out to be a creep. Now, that said, Amiya, yes, the U.S. government has provided assistance, and I personally was involved in that. The head of my foundation, Nader Afshar, went to Buenos Aires in the 95, 96, 97 period as a consultant to the judge to help translate the tapes that they had in Farsi. So he translated those Farsi tapes of the taxi drivers to the Iranian embassy and helped them to actually track down the involvement of those Iranian government officials who were working out of the Iran embassy. So it's thanks to him, who was in part sponsored by the US government, that the Argentinian government got the dope, got the information to issue the indictment. I was also a witness in the case, and you can see my testimony is cited in the ultimate indictment about a dozen times, talking about the way that Iran operates overseas terror networks. Has the U.S. government since then done anything? I mean, what are we going to do? They've gone to Interpol. The arrest warrants have been at Interpol since 2005, 2006, I believe. Rezai has not been able to travel since then very much, although the FBI in Rome and met with him also in Germany, as you'll find out in my new book, and was not arrested in either place. So there are things going on that don't always get reported.
But we're still really, if there is justice to be had, we're still waiting.
We're still waiting for justice. And by the way, I am not convinced that Rezai was part of Amiens at all. I'm not convinced that he was part of that of the decision-making team. But be that as it may, he is one of the people who has been indicted, and it would be great to see him come to justice. He is truly an evil man.
So I'm going to ask you to answer this question without being political. I know that's complicated for you, but try.
No, I do that all the time, Shoshana.
So periodically we do say things, and President Trump certainly did certain things to constrain Iran's behavior. And there's a lot of pushback from the sort of left of the American foreign policy community. After the US got rid of Soleimani, Human Rights Watch said that American sanctions on Iran pose a serious threat to Iranian health and access to essential medicines. The Atlantic Council said that the US was having too much needless violence. I mean, I guess there's necessary violence, but this was needless violence and taking out Soleimani. Why does the left seem to have a concern about violence against certain people and not against other people?
Right. They don't care when Jews get murdered on October 7th, for example. It's very clear. I used to say that under Obama, it was better to be a mullah in Tehran than a Jew in Jerusalem, in your own Capitol building an apartment. So it's just, this is the way the left thinks. I said earlier that the Democrat Party sees the regime in Tehran as not just a friend, but an ally, They believe that. They both. So it's hard to answer this question without getting a little bit ideological, because it involves ideology. You're talking about what they believe, and that is ideology. So the left of the United States is committed ideologically to the end of the United States of America as we know it. They are committed to the end of our constitutional republic. They are committed to the end of our constitutional freedoms. They would like to see our country run by a global elite. They would like to see us become part of a global one world community run by Klaus Schwab and all of his proteges, who include little cookie Macron here in France and Justin Trudeau in Canada, both of whom, by the way, served as interns to Klaus Schwab. So this is yes, absolutely. They were both interns at the World Economic Forum, Macron and Justin Trudeau, okay? So the left would like to see the end of those constitutional freedoms. So, of course, Iran would like to see the end of America too. We're buddies. Hey, we got the same goals. And it's been that way since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Why did the left immediately embrace Khomeini, which they did? They embraced Khomeini. I can remember sitting in Paris, listening to the BBC, talking about this new freedom that was going to come to Iran, and the horrible dictator, the Shah, was going to go, and this new freedom, this Islamic freedom and women were going to be free finally in Iran. They believed this stuff and they put it out. Shoshana, if you have been so deluded for 40 years, for over 40 years, and the truth is standing right in front of you, you would never see it. You would never see it. They just have blinders over their eyes.
So this brings us to our last question in the closing of our program. And I appreciate it, Ken. In a lot of ways, I appreciate the fact that you've talked to us about things that happened 40 years ago up to the present. Because we tend to focus on what's happening right now and not look back. It's really important to be reminded sometimes that there's history here. But people that listen to the program know that I like to go out, you won't believe this, like to go out on a positive, optimistic note. And so my question to you, it's not really a question. Give us a positive as we're looking forward. Give us a positive for Iran, for the region, for the people of Iran, for the United States, without being political. Give us an up for the afternoon.
Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt that nobody could have survived. 2 millimeters to one side or the other, and he was a dead man. The only kid in America, 20 years old, with an AR-15 who couldn't shoot, was the wannabe assassin. God's hedge of protection was protecting Donald Trump. That's a pretty positive thing, to know that God has protected Donald Trump, because it certainly was not the Secret Service, was it? And it wasn't the local police who protected him.
And
it was God alone who protected Donald Trump. Now, for the Iranian people, where does that give you something positive for the Iranian people? Because a Trump administration will, if the policies that I've been discussing with people who will serve in the next administration, if those policies are enacted, there will be a future of freedom for people in Iran. And they look forward to a future of freedom. They look forward to having, at the very least, moral support from the United States of America, instead of what they've gotten from Obama and Biden, which is a deaf ear and a blind eye whenever they rise up in the streets. So I happen to think that the future for Iran is very bright, because the people of Iran are extremely talented, brilliant, both in science and technology, in arts, in cinema. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful place with a horrible, horrible regime. And just think of all of that talent released and used for positive things instead of murder and mayhem.
That is a very positive way to go out. And I would just add to that, that the people of Iran and the people of Israel had many decades of close relations. And you see among the dissidents in Iran an appreciation for Israel. You see little videos where they won't walk on an Israeli flag that the government puts on the ground. And so it's also a positive thought that there could be a restoration of those ties between the people of Iran and the people of Israel. And I think that's as good as it's going to get. So I'm going to say thank you, Ken Timmerman. It was a terrific hour that we spent with you. To the listeners, Raising Olives in Provence, and keep your eye on Ken, because he's got another book coming out in September, and we'll read it. Thank you very much.
There we go. Thanks so much. God bless.